where you first place that story is just the beginning. If it's online, it's going to live online forever. And I've had, clients say that one online story that they continued to get clicks and sales off that story for years afterwards.
Hey guys, welcome to the Wine, Whiskey and Weed Show. Today I have Lisa Weser with me. She has been, she is actually one of the main PR and, personalities of cannabis world. And more importantly, which really interested me personally, was Lisa was heading the brand communication and marketing for Anheuser-Busch for US. And I think apart from that, she's worked with clients like AT&T, Canopy Growth, Visa. So really want to learn a lot from her about how to get good PR, what is a good story, and we'll just deep dive into that. So Lisa, thanks for joining me here. And, why don't you introduce our audience about yourself and just what you're up to these days?
Sure. Thanks for having me on, first of all. My name is Lisa Weser. My practice is called Trailblaze. We're a boutique agency that focuses primarily on the cannabis space. And we definitely specialize in beverage. We don't just represent beverage, but since that's my background, that's really our roots. We've been doing this for about 4 years. We work with a really broad swath of clients, from some of the largest names in cannabis, like Canopy Growth, where we've been fortunate to launch iconic brands like Martha Stewart CBD, some of their first ever cannabis and CBD beverages like Quattro, both in Canada and the US. To some MSOs, so brands like MaryMed, where we've just launched their Vibations brand, which is a powdered THC beverage with caffeine, which is kind of going after the energy drinks category, which is interesting. And for that client, we also, of course, did a great PR stunt last year, the world's largest pot brownie, an 850-pound 20,000 milligram pot brownie that went viral and ended up on Saturday Night Live, which was fantastic. And a few other MSO clients like that. And then we also work with some startups. So especially in the beverage space, we've worked with several startups in both the CBD and the cannabis space. At the same time, I think leveraged my beverage and alcohol to work with them to help get into retailers. So we've helped some clients make partnerships with distributors from the alcohol world who are interested in carrying CBD beverages as a way to start to test that market and get that on the shelves alongside alcohol, which I think is where we all see the cannabis beverage industry going eventually. So that's really what I've been up to. My team is virtual, so I have half my team in LA, half my team in New York, and a few other people interspersed in legal markets around the US. And before that, I led brand PR at Anheuser-Busch InBev, as you mentioned. So I was in charge of marketing communications for their US portfolio of beers, which ranged from, their high-end beers like Stella Artois, to their, core brands like Budweiser and Bud Light, to a lot of the newer entrants, some of the more like FMB, Spike Seltzer, the Ritas. Now they've really gotten into canned wines and just continued, to kind of innovate in that category. So a lot of time working in beverage and alcohol with distributors. And I think all in, I've launched probably close to 40 beverage brands across, THC, CBD, and alcohol and water. So yeah, I'm looking forward to talking to you today and speaking at the Drinks Expo in a couple of weeks.
Absolutely. We'll be pleasure to meet you there as well. And, I think I'm looking forward to that panel that you're coming up with. So it looks great. So let's go in the PR part, right? Like most of our companies watching the show, Lisa, is really small to medium, so obviously we're not, comparing how a big CPG brand or a big, beverage brand, like let's say Anheuser-Busch family would roll out a brand, right? So I really want to bring context there is, let's imagine a medium or a small beverage company, or even a cannabis edibles brand, or any other brand, right? One is, what kind of story they should draft like their, if it was a PR release, right? They're writing a 2-page PR release. What are the good elements of that PR release, and why do you think they need to write that? Because, based on your experience, that's what is getting picked up, and not what people are just typically writing, that, hey, launching this and launching that. So give us some examples of crafting a good story.
Sure. I mean, the first thing that I tell all my clients is that press releases do not drive earned media coverage. So press releases, I think are a great exercise for helping to nail down your narrative and align with your partners on your narrative if you're working with other partners or distributors. And they are a great tactic for SEO and just for kind of, legitimizing your business. But reporters don't pick up a press release off the wire and write a news story anymore. It just doesn't happen unless there's a major celebrity involved. And that is where a PR agency comes in, because the way that those stories get made is that we really work directly with the journalists and influencers that we have spent, decades cultivating relationships with, to help match the right story with the right outlet, with the right writer, and to really kind of pitch them and sell them in on your narrative, to have them sample your product. So there's a lot more that goes into getting those stories made. But to back up for a moment, when you asked about kind of what you should be thinking about writing and your narrative, the other place we always start with is, how do you differentiate? Because I'm sure, as you know, especially in beverage, there's just an absolute proliferation of brands. We're really seeing that in the CBD space. We're starting to see it in the THC space, and of course in water and alcohol. That's already been the case, craft beer, etc. So how are you going to differentiate, and what can you say that you can own that maybe you're the only brand or product that could say that? And that's not always easy to figure out, but I think that is the first task, because you really need to find a way to stand apart. For journalists, they get over 100 pitches a day for products that are almost identical, and they're only going to open maybe 10% of them. And so what can we tell them that is different? Whether it is your founder story, so maybe you've got a really unique origin story. Maybe you've got a person of color behind the brand that has a different point of view. Is it your ingredients, your flavor profile? Are you bringing something new to the category, like a Delta 8? Do you have some data to kind of support why the market needs this, that is new, fresh data? Are you working maybe with, an influencer or a celebrity or some other kind of public figure that's going to be novel or interesting? So that's really where we start. And, then we build kind of the narrative from there with a press release, and also just kind of a detailed message platform that we can use well beyond the launch for, everything else that we do. Because ultimately you want to pick 3 to 5 key messages that you're going to pull through everything you do, from your press release to your website to your social posts. There's the stories the messages you want to see pull through, and the actual stories that people write. So it's really helping you identify what's different and what's most important about your product, and making sure that you are really consistently getting that message out across 360 communications platforms.
Got it. So back on what you just said, it's good to even clarify with what I'm planning to do as well, right? So is there even a free press release happening, or it's all paid to play sort of things? One is that. Second is, when we personally do press releases here and there, obviously we'll try the business wires and all the general stuff, but then that's all going in a very mass and general, spaces. It's just SEO actually, as you think, it's mainly played, and it's just another content for them. So they're just posting it because of SEO, another extra content from all this wires, right? But let's say I crafted a great story. You told me what to do. I've written a nice narrative, original story. Now comes the distribution part, right? So what is a good approach? Like, do you think it's good to have a carrot in your email saying, hey, we're looking to spend some ad money, or purely be passionate about that story, and stop it there? How do we get people interested, apart from these wires?
Yeah, well, it's interesting because, historically, when we all went to journalism school and learned PR, there was kind of a very clear division between paid media and earned media. And paid media was an ad that you bought so that you could control your message, and earned media was true PR, where it was completely unpaid, where the journalist decides what they want to say or write, and you have no control over, that outcome.
Yeah.
I think what we're seeing now is kind of a interesting gray space, where we still have earned media, but there can be a paid component of it. So the first thing that I think is really important is affiliate marketing. And typically today, when we take on a product brand that we're going to represent, we don't like to represent a brand unless they are using affiliate marketing, if they legally can. So a THC product, for example, can't do that because they can't sell THC products online. But a CBD product, whether it's a beverage or a lip balm, or a gummy, they typically can. And the reason for that is when you think about a lifestyle outlet that you might want to have write about your beverage, like, Thrillist or New York Magazine, The Strategist or Men's Health or Allure. A lot of those print magazines have been shutting down, and they're really relying on their digital website. And the way that they keep the lights on and pay their freelancers and their journalists increasingly is affiliate marketing. And what that means is that the journalist might review 50 beverages and do a roundup and say, these are my 7 favorites. You can sample that journalist. You can, hope that yours gets picked as one of the 7. That's up to them. That is earned. However, they will often say, we're only going to include in our roundup products that have affiliate marketing. And what that means is that when they say, I recommended this beverage, I loved it, I tasted it, there's a link to buy it. And then when somebody goes and buys it from that link, the website gets a cut of that sale, right?
Got it.
So that's an example where it is earned media. You still need to hire a PR agency, or a publicist to pitch that reporter, to work with them to get their mailing address, send them the product, send them your press kit with images.
Why can't people go direct to them? Why you think? Because obviously they just want to talk to you and not like 100 different people. They prefer to talk to publicists.
It's possible to go to direct, and some people do, but I think the thing is the relationship with a journalist is a relationship, and a lot of times it's built over time. I have had some journalists who have come to me after a founder pitched them and said, "Don't pitch me, hire a publicist." Like, some of them bristle at being pitched by people that are not professional PR practitioners, and maybe it's because the approach is wrong, that the people don't necessarily know what they're doing. However, I do think that when you've got a really passionate founder, somebody that spends some time building relationships, so they start to follow the journalist on Twitter, like their stories, maybe connect with them on LinkedIn or on Instagram, maybe meet them at an event. Now they've got a personal connection. And in that case, I have seen where a founder can pitch a reporter directly and, say like, hey, I just want to share another, update on my product. And in that case, you want to not just reach out to them when you want something, but you want to, so that it is a true relationship.
Cold calling just doesn't work, you think, anymore? Like just purely DMing 20 journalists on Twitter, let's say, just to get the machine going, it's not going to help.
Honestly, it sometimes hurts. It sometimes angers them.
Oh, got it.
And sometimes they will, sometimes they will repost what people are sending them. Sometimes they'll repost bad pitches and messages. So, it's like anything else. I mean, if a random person slides into your DMs, like, how often do you respond? Probably not very often, unless they're really offering something compelling. So, and especially, like everybody, we all get a million texts, emails, calls all day long. And that is where the relationship, whether it's through a publicist or you're a founder who has just spent a lot of time building relationships, with journalists, then you can kind of get through to them. But I think that's kind of the way it works either way, if it is on an earned basis. You did ask a question also about advertising. I think especially for younger, newer brands and companies, it can be really important for them to get into some of the trade publications. And in that case, I do think that sometimes first establishing a relationship as an advertiser and then coming with an ask for, maybe for them to do a feature story on you, whether that is you asking yourself as a founder or through a publicist. That is another kind of common tactic. So like in the cannabis world, outlets like, Marijuana Venture, MG Magazine, Marijuana Business Daily, they're print magazines, they're monthly or quarterly. They all depend on advertising dollars. They do kind of glossy full page spreads. They're not really pay for play because they decide, who they're going to feature. But building a relationship by first being an advertiser, it shows some respect that you read their publication, that you are targeting their readers, and so in that case, sometimes spending some ad dollars first before making that request, is the right approach.
I think the PR has evolved as well. I see personally, I see that as a social validation, not more than a distribution play these days. So let's say what I mean by that is, let's say if an article comes on High Times, or High Times is still a good example because it's a lot of B2C and good traffic. But let's say any B2B magazine, it comes there. It's usually the traffic eyeballs they'll get is like, let's say 1,000 views, versus even a small Instagram post will get 1,000 views, right? So where do you see this? Why shall people still do PR? Like, what is the play there?
I think there's a few reasons, again, especially for startups. The first thing I'll say is it's interesting because I once had a tiny CBD product startup, and we got them in this roundup, during 420 from rollingstone.com, which is about as good as it gets. And they were included along some other major products. Guess how many clicks they got to their website from that?
Rolling Stones, I'm guessing a lot, like 150,000.
They got 4.
Oh, wow.
However, that story, what was shared on LinkedIn by them and by others. It was then reposted to their Instagram. It was tweeted. They got a lot of inbounds, hundreds of inbounds and sales and repeat sales, not from the original story, but from all of the different places where that story was kind of syndicated and reshared, especially on social media. And that makes sense because when you think about it, how often do you go out to rollingstone.com and read a story? We're all really busy. We don't do that really. We find our news in aggregators, whether we're checking Twitter, whether we are using Apple News or other aggregators. So that's where and LinkedIn and other places where people are sharing stories, and it's kind of curated. For me, my LinkedIn is very curated, where I'm seeing news about, marketing, CPG, cannabis, alcohol, because, that's my space. So in that case, you're getting an even more hyper-targeted audience when those pieces get reshared. And a lot of time there's a lot more credibility behind that because, of who's sharing it. So that's the first thing to think about, is that it's not where you first place that story is just the beginning. If it's online, it's going to live online forever. And I've had, clients say that one online story that they continued to get clicks and sales off that story for years afterwards. And all of the different ways, that it can be reshared. So that's kind of the first reason for doing PR. A second thing I'll say is one of my other small startup clients managed to get a huge distribution partnership with probably one of the biggest alcoholic beverage distributors, in the US. And they are a tiny female-founded startup, and they were the only brand that was picked up that wasn't like a celebrity-backed brand. And that was in part due to an introduction that I made to, another, between the two parties. But they told me that the reason that they were selected is because, they were able to provide kind of a sell deck that showed all the press that they had gotten and how they gained social media followers. And, in that case, it's really, whether it's for getting investors or for getting distribution deals, they want to see that you are marketing your product, that you are spending money on public relations and marketing, and that, your brand is already out there. And that can be the thing that moves the needle and makes a decision. If they're picking one brand, yours over, the other 5. So that's another reason that people come to us a lot, is because, they really want to get that, as seen in Forbes, Thrillist, Rolling Stone, etc., in their deck, on their website, etc., because that's going to add, a lot of validity, for the different shareholders and stakeholders they're trying to reach.
Yeah, great point. So I've written, like, it's basically what you do with your stories as well, right? Once it's published, and how you use it in different ways. Like sales deck is a great example. Like when you're pitching your distributors or dispensaries, how you can include that. One example is how you repackage and make micro content out of it for social media. What other ways we can sort of use press that we've got, like, and put them at good use? Any other examples that come to mind? Where brands can sort of repackage it and distribute it in different ways?
Well, again, I think, there's different types of brand building. There's building your personal brand. So I think, especially for startups, it's important for the founder to build their own brand, as well as, there is the product brand. And then sometimes there's also the company brand, right? So you'll often have a parent company, and then they'll have one or more brands, that they put out. And this is especially the case like with MSOs, multi-state operators in cannabis. So, we will represent, the master company like MaryMed, then we will represent maybe the 7 products that they have in their portfolio, which might be a variety of edibles, beverages, vapes, right? And then we will also, basically serve as the publicist for, the CEO and maybe a handful of other C-suite individuals, the CMO, et cetera. So when we're crafting a public relations strategy, we're not just saying, let's sample the product and let's just try to get, all this lifestyle stories. Yeah. We are also trying to program them on podcasts like this. We are trying to get them, listed in like 40 under 40 and, 10 to watch type of lists. We are trying to get features on their company in places like Forbes and Inc., where they can talk a little bit more, not just about product, but about strategy. We're also trying to do the type of media relations that's going to build their corporate brand and their employer brand so that people want to go work there, right? So those are all the different ways that PR can work for you. It's not just about getting product placements for your actual brand. True. I think the hard thing about PR is it is probably the toughest marketing vertical where you can measure true ROI, because it is very difficult to tie a direct line from public relations to sales, because you don't, unless there's like a promo code that they got from an influencer and then they buy with that code, it's really tough to know where somebody heard about your product. But, one of the best things that ever happened to me when it was one of my first cannabis clients that I represented, they told me that somebody came to them after a few weeks and said, all of a sudden, I hear people talking about you. I see a billboard, you're in my social feed. Then I go online and there's a story about you. Like, it feels like you're everywhere all of a sudden. And that's, I call it surround sound, but that's what we're trying to create for our clients, is to create those moments where, there's stories about them, in all different types of verticals, mainstream verticals, trade verticals, podcasts, and it's working together with their paid marketing, their outdoor advertising, if they're doing that, so that it does kind of feel like all of a sudden they're on the map, right?
It hits me right there. Give me some examples of, let's say, PR campaigns, Lisa, right? So I think what comes to my mind is when you're launching a new brand, it's very easy. Like what you said is, all right, let's do some founder stories. Let's do a brand kickoff. Let's do some account stories that it's placed here and so on, right? But after 1 year, what kind of things you can come up to sort of refresh things out there? After you're done with your first thing, what are some other things that you can do?
You bet. I mean, look, clients bring us on to launch their products, but if that's all we did, we'd be out of business, because you can only do that once, right?
True.
That's really just the beginning. And, my background, again, comes from Budweiser, a brand that is, over 100 years old, that a company has managed to keep that brand relevant, right? For decades and decades and generations. So, how do you do that? The way that we do it, whether we're launching a product and then trying to sustain it, or whether we're inheriting like a legacy product that's already been on the market that maybe is languishing or wants to get to the next level, we really work with them to build what I call a cultural calendar, which is where we really kind of look at the year in 4 parts, kind of quarter by quarter, and we look at what milestones do you as a company have coming up? So do you have different products or SKUs launching at different times? When are your earnings if you're public? When are you having, what's your news cycle of the announcements you need to share? But then we look at what's happening in culture, and we look at, okay, the holidays, 420, but not even just those moments, but, like if you're a product, if you're a CBD product that, helps with relaxation, are there times when we should be targeting parents, back to school time, summer vacation, like, what are those moments? So we look at, a variety of holidays, seasonal moments, and sometimes unexpected moments. I especially like to get outside of the cannabis vertical because, for example, everybody went after 420 in April. We did some 420 work, but our best work we did for April Fool's Day because we wanted to get ahead of the 420 narrative because we knew it would be so cluttered. So we did a really fun cannabis activation on April Fool's Day, on 4/1. So we work with them to kind of plan ahead at least 3 months in advance, sometimes longer if there's going to be some production timeline, to figure out what their stories are going to be and how we can kind of intersperse the stories they want to tell with what's going on in culture, so that, we have kind of an always on storytelling approach, if that makes sense. Right now, absolutely. It's July. We're planning right now activations for Halloween, activations for the holidays, Thanksgiving, etc. So.
Got it. So, Lisa, let's say you're working in a very small company, and then you just have like 4 people overall, right? So one guy's selling, one is a founder doing finances, inventory, production, and now you hired this one new person, just to get some PR work done, right? Like to get some PR awareness and so on. What kind of KPIs or what kind of task list you would make up for that junior person to get started on? I hope you're understanding, right? So like if it was pure in-house, your own company you're running, basic small to medium company, what are the things you would make that person do?
Sure. Well, you can't really get much done at all unless you have a really strong media list. And that is basically, it can be something as simple as a Google spreadsheet, where you spend some time researching who is covering your beat, right? So if you are a cannabis beverage, you're looking at who's covering cannabis, who's covering beverages, who's covering cannabis.
So make a nice list, basically. I got it.
Yeah. So you're getting, and that can be difficult. There are tools that, especially that PR agencies have and pay for, where we have databases where we can go and we can, do some kind of Boolean searches for who is covering my specific, set of criteria, and get their email address, get their, sometimes their phone number, and a lot of times their social handles, right? I use those tools some of the time to fill in the blanks, but I do a lot of this kind of manually or in real time, which is I'm active on social platforms. I'm, always following new journalists and influencers across Twitter, Instagram. I mean, now people are on Twitch, Discord, etc. And I'm always kind of populating that list. So I think that's where you have to start. Is you have to know who is covering.
So, I think
if you send your beverage press release to somebody that is covering, like
I get it. So I think we can make it. That's a good point. Like we'll make a nice list and it's customized. Each email is customized when you're sending. But do you think this junior person? Sometimes what I've found is authority matters. Like if a CEO is sending a message to a journalist saying, hey, John, nice to meet you, and I would love to catch up with you if you're coming here or there. I'm in the city and blah blah. Versus a person, who's just a junior and just they know that they're just doing a mechanical PR work. Any tips there on how they can get their conversions versus if it was an owner doing the same work? You know that they would get better conversions.
Well, look. My honest opinion, having done this for 3 decades as both a client, as an agency person, I think the biggest mistake that people make is thinking that their PR or social media can be done by an intern or somebody right out of college. I've seen that not only fail, but I've seen that actually cause a lot of harm. And oftentimes when companies come to us, they come to us because they have just either had a junior person or they've hired a really cheap agency with really young people that didn't know what they were doing. And now they are ready for some adults to enter the room. And, it doesn't mean that you have to have a big budget to do public relations, but if you had $3,000 a month, I would rather see you hire a part-time freelancer with 20 years of experience and strong relationships who can get more done for you in 3 hours a day than somebody who is right out of school that doesn't know what they're doing is going to get done. That doesn't mean don't hire junior people, because I have hired people out of college and trained them, but I will often spend 2 years training them before I let them talk to a reporter.
Understood.
That's what I always advise. If people come to us, they want PR support, but they can't yet afford an agency or like the full
What
package,
about
is to go to a
submitting your
freelancer.
press releases? Like when you just Google like submit free press release sort of thing, right? So the list thing is amazing. Reaching out to people is amazing. What are the 3-4 more things that people can do in their own offices to get more, hits, like more knocking the doors sort of thing?
I think if you have a product, you've got to get that product in the market and have people sample it.
Okay.
There's really 2 ways when you're trying to get editorial coverage. You need a strong press kit. So that means that even if you're just creating a Google Drive, you need your company logo, your executive headshots, some really great high-res photos of your product, both like on a white background, the single product, the family of products, and maybe some lifestyle images of, product in different use cases, right? So that's kind of called your digital press kit. Reporters hate it if you send them an attachment. If you, think of your own inbox, if somebody's sending you a bunch of attachments or huge files, like
True.
You're going to just delete it, right? So you never want to do that. You want to send them a really brief pitch if you're emailing them, and then a link to your press kit where all of that stuff is housed on a Dropbox, on a Google Drive, someplace else. So even if they can't try your product, which is often the case with THC products, because you can't cross state lines to sample that, a lot of times just having a really strong editorial visual assets will get the job done. And the second thing is just to find ways to sample people. So if you need to show up where they are, or if you get a dialogue going, and, especially with COVID, everybody's working from home. So we've had to reach out to hundreds of reporters over time to request their home, mailing addresses so we can send them product. And then sometimes they'll write in 2 weeks, sometimes they'll write in 2 months, a year, but they're often not going to write the story unless they've tried the product and feel like they can really recommend it. So sampling is really important.
Well, super. And is this still like is it okay for people to ask, I'm coming in town, let's say if I'm pitching, I'm getting my story done in London, and I'll say, hey, I'm in London from 13th to 18th, would be great to catch up for a coffee. Is it okay to say, or it's conveyed as like some bribe sort of thing, that you're taking me out for lunch to get some work done?
Yeah, no, it's in no way a bribe. And most, and most reporters, unless they're freelancers, they can't accept a gift or have to have things paid for them over like a, very small dollar amount anyway. It's actually what you're suggesting is the way that things get done. It's been tougher during COVID, but anytime that I'm in a new market, I try to reach out to the journalists, or even other people in the industry.
Taking wine and dine is still a good approach, right? Like to have relation in this industry.
Yeah, or to just meet them for a quick coffee and bring some of your product along and leave some with them, or in a t-shirt or whatever that is. So that's still a tried and true tactic. Or taking somebody to a yoga class, to a spinning class, to having an extra concert ticket. It depends who they are, if they can accept that. But sometimes that goes a long way. And I will tell you, some of my best friends started out as a situation where I was the publicist and they were the reporter, and we went to a music festival together because they were covering it, and then we went to dinner and hung out, and 20 years later I'm at their wedding and we're best friends. So like relationships do develop over time when you're spending time with people in an organic way.
So one last question, Lisa. I've noticed that there are a lot of freelance journalists these days, or writers, right? So one person is writing, and they're contributing in Forbes, in High Times, or 5-6 places, right? So instead of the asset, this person is more important, like to have a relation, because I may get a home run, like 5 different places my press may go, right? But at the same time, I don't know whether they are on a payroll of Forbes, or I don't know what exclusivity, or I find myself as starting them by giving a writing gig. That, hey, are you looking for some writing gigs? And then maybe that is a right way to start understanding this person. Where do you see this space? Because a lot of journalists are sort of freelance writers as well.
It goes back to what I said before, which is that all of the media outlets are cutting their budgets. You constantly see stories of like 500 layoffs at BuzzFeed, et cetera. So a lot of really good journalists are going freelance. And so there's a few things to that said. One is that, if anything you can do to help them do their job, what they have to do to eat is they have to build relationships with editors, and they need to bring those editor stories. They need to pitch stories to them and say like, hey, I've got an idea for a story. And they need to convince that editor to pay them to write this story, right? So what you can do is you can bring them a fully baked, awesome story where you can say, here's my idea. Here's some data. Here's 3 different spokespeople that you can talk to with different perspectives. And then, they'll go and do their due diligence and build on that. So anything that you can do to bring them something that they can, pitch is helpful. By following people on Twitter and LinkedIn, you can often kind of see where they're writing, and you can tell when they are freelance versus their staff writers. And if they're staff writers, like they have a steady byline, they're only writing typically for 1 publication, where a freelancer may write for 8 publications. And some of my biggest stories, including a New York Times cover, was not written by a staff writer. It was written by a freelancer. So you never want to overlook a freelancer because they can be incredibly important and powerful. But again, you have to be kind of tracking what they're writing about, where they're writing, and, bring them some value.
Super, Lisa. So I think we'll wrap it up with just like a quick takeaway, which you want to give to, everyone about like quick 5 to-dos and 5 not to-dos, especially if you break it down on what not to do as well to piss them off, right?
Yeah. Okay. Oh, geez, let's see. Well, I mean, I guess the first thing is it's a relationship with a journalist is like any other relationship where it needs to be reciprocal and it needs to have respect. So, if you want to take something out of the tank, you got to be putting something back in. So think of it that way as an exchange. Think of it as something that is over time. So don't make your first time that you reach out to them asking for something, right? If they do something great for you, like if a journalist writes a great story, what helps them out, sometimes they get paid by the click. So share it on all your social feeds, tag them. They want to see that you're putting support behind that story. Email them to thank them for the story, and say like, hey, next time you're working on this, come to me, right? Maybe reach out to them kind of in between times to compliment stories they're writing on, right? So I mean, treat it like any other relationship that you would be building, and don't make it just one way or just when you kind of need something. The other don't that we talked about is just, don't necessarily, even if you have a small budget, don't assume that means that you can only afford an intern or, somebody that doesn't know what they're doing. A lot of times with a tight budget, you can still get somebody really experienced and high value by, instead of going to a big agency, maybe going to an individual publicist who you're only going to have some of the time, but that time's going to be, really well spent and high value. So that's another one. Absolutely. It's now that kind of COVID is winding down a bit, being able to go and network at real events like your Cannabis Drinks Expo. That's a great place to go and meet other people in the industry. Journalists attend those, influencers attend those, other organizers. So it's just a great way, to kind of get out there. And in terms of dues, one of the things that we talked about is if you get a great media hit, like don't let it die on the vine. Find ways to amplify that, on across a variety of social channels. Send it to all of the employees on your team or distributors, and ask them to share it, because that gives that story new life. It really boosts the clicks and the engagement and the SEO, and that helps the writer and it helps you. So think about that full life cycle. And then, finally, don't assume that putting out a press release is your PR strategy. It's not. It's kind of a box that you need to check, but you almost don't even need a PR or a press release anymore, unless you're a public company and are forced to file one because you need to for disclosure purposes. It is really more of a tool for getting your narrative together and kind of for SEO, but you really do need either a publicist or somebody in-house, or you need to be a passionate founder who can actually dedicate the time, to building these relationships and doing outreach the right way, which a lot of founders don't have the time to do, but it is possible if you're on that kind of budget. The last thing I'll say is, even if you're on a tight budget, it doesn't mean you can't do amazing things. The biggest program that we did last year, we did for $3,500. And that was that world's largest pot brownie that we did with our client, MaryMed. They were launching a new edible. It was only available in one state, Massachusetts, in one dispensary. And they were launching it 3 weeks before Christmas. So who the hell is going to care about that? Who's going to write about that? How am I going to get somebody in California or New York to write about that? So, we came up with a couple ideas that were really expensive. And so then we went back to the beginning and we came up with the idea of why don't we just make the world's biggest pot brownie? And we researched, Guinness to find out how big it had to be. And we ended up building an 850-pound kind of 3-foot by 3-foot brownie. It was at the max THC limit, which is 20,000 for Boston. We got 1,750 plus stories, 5 billion impressions.
Wow.
It's been winning gold trophies at every, marketing and PR award we've submitted it to. But it also, it bumped the stock price for the company. It attracted new analysts. It attracted new business partners, and continues to pay off for that company. It really did help put them on the map in many ways. And it was, really, we did it for, the cost of the ingredients and the THC and of course the PR agency. But yeah, you can still do big things with a small budget. And even if you're a startup. Yeah.
Congrats on that story. I think, great, Lisa, appreciate your time on this. I think I've learned personally as well a lot, on exactly how to craft a PR strategy. Anything else, Lisa, you have for us here?
I think that's it. You can follow me at Cannabis Publicist on Instagram, and Trailblaze.co on both Twitter and Instagram as well, or just Lisa Weser. I'm out there.
Great. So I think, just for the audience, she's I think words are not coming, but I think you come from like really top-notch brands. So you're way, toned down because of the audience of this show. But for sure, I would give a high shout out to, reaching out to her for, especially if you have, real long-term strategy behind it, because she has done the game. And so I think feel free to reach out to Lisa. We'll have her details in the comments. Appreciate Lisa. See you soon then.
You bet. Sounds good. I'll see you in Chicago.